Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 24th special meeting of the board. We are going to have a presentation on enrollment and bus parking, and after that, we will be taking public comment on this issue. We'll have some discussion from the board, and then we'll take public comment on the issue. Mr. Ruth, did you want to?
Yes, just in terms of public comment, it's the board's policy that only taxpayers and residents can speak in terms of public comment. However, because of the pendency of the Madison Ford Road application for land development before the Lower Merion Township, if there is a resident of Upper Merion Township or West Conshohocken Borough that lives proximate to the Madison Ford Road site, those individuals will be permitted to speak as if they were a resident or a taxpayer, but those are the only exceptions to the rule.
Thank you. I will turn it over to Dr. Marseille. Thank you.
Welcome. Good evening. I want to thank the board and those in the audience for coming tonight. I've mentioned before, for those who have come to the board meetings, that I believe in this open conversation, though I know that there are dissenting views with regards to next steps. But I think this is one of many opportunities to hear the community and to hear your concerns and your recommendations. So we do welcome that in the spirit that it really comes from your commitment to the district, your commitment to your community. So we hope that as we continue to think about this process, that we do that in collaboration moving forward. So really briefly, I wanted to mention that on the 17th, we had another meeting to really lay out some of the things that we like to share with the public around this enrollment conversation, which really has led into the need for additional bus parking. Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to sort of recap some of the slides that we presented for those who were unable to join us on the 17th. In addition to that, what we had promised on the 17th, and we hope that we're able to at least answer some of the questions that came out of the 17th, is that some of you in the audience and others who probably couldn't make it tonight had some really specific questions about some of the items that we presented. And what we tried to do as best as we can was regroup within those 7 days and try to address those comments and those suggestions in this particular slide. So I'm going to go through some initial slides with you, and then I'm going to pass it over to Pat Ganan, our Director of Operations, who will walk you through some specifics around some of the options that we're looking at. I want to reiterate that tonight is, like the 17th, an opportunity to be heard. There are no decisions that will be made. I do want to thank those who reached out to my office and expressed concern about this timeline and about this meeting. Though I could not honor your request in terms of rescheduling tonight's meeting, but I do appreciate the call and the conversation. But like I said earlier, we're hoping that this will be one of many opportunities for you to openly discuss some of the areas in which we are thinking as we try to combat this enrollment growth. So on the 17th, What we tried to cover is really take a look at our growth in terms of development and trends. We tried to provide a timeline in terms of decision-making and where we are. And then we thought it was extremely important. I know many of you have sat in numerous meetings, and you're keenly aware of the supports and the services that our transportation provides to this community and to our students. So we thought it was important to revisit that, even though many of you are aware of that, and I know you've expressed appreciation for those services. And then we tried to talk about where we currently are in terms of the landscape, some options that I know are not very popular, options that you want to talk about. So we'll continue that conversation tonight and try to talk about next steps. So the meeting on the 17th, and then tonight we're going to hear your public comment. What we're going to do is take that public comment, try to answer as many of those questions and concerns as we can, and we will reconvene on December 8th with trying to address those and some additional information that we may have come across during that week. With the timeline of December 15th is when we'd like to move forward and make a vote on the next steps. This is a list, and you've seen this before in the previous slide, meetings that we've had, meetings that we will continue to have. I think one of the things that is new to this slide is the November 25th community meeting regarding Matson Ford Road that's taking place tomorrow at Harrington. So we look forward to, again, hearing public comments with regards to that. So if you take a look at this slide, many of you have seen this. I want to reiterate that in the last 3 years, we've seen growth. And what you're looking at is the burgundy or red line is our actual numbers in the district, which is our 10-day enrollment. And that is a time where the 10th-day enrollment, we pause and we take a snapshot in terms of where we are with our student population. Now, the blue line, you're looking at the DeJohn-Haley report analysis that was done several years ago that shows that we are far exceeding the DeJohn-Haley predictions, and we're currently at 8,053 students. So, to no one's surprise, you're aware that there's mitigating factors with regards to enrollment growth. Well, we know that there's many impacts to that. There is budgetary impacts to more students in our building. There is facilities in terms of classrooms. And we're living that right now in terms of some of the modifications and additions we've done at several of our elementary schools to accommodate that growth. And then there are curricular programs that we have to think about in terms of the impact. And then we look at bell schedules, whether or not the number of students enrolled in our schools will require some modifications at some point. Those we may argue on whether or not that those bell schedules will need to take place soon or somewhere down the future, but we understand that there are some impacts to our current enrollment growth. And what we try to summarize is that though there might be, and I said this at the last meeting, continued dialogue around the DeJohn-Haley projections. What we do know is that we have more students in our building. What we do know is we have more students sitting in our classrooms. So we are seeing signs of enrollment increasing, and we are seeing signs of single and multifamily units compared to 2012. And I want to clarify that in the next couple of slides, because I think that was one of the questions and recommendations we got in terms of being very mindful about the way in which we're presenting the data and what it could construe and whether or not it was, we were sending the right message. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. And we wanted to stress the fact that this is an enrollment issue in terms of growth, and how do we better prepare for that. So we showed this slide and mentioned that we worked with the township to double and triple check our accuracy, since the letter that we did send out, or I sent out, did have some miscalculations, and I apologize for those numbers, but these numbers here really represent planned units. Planned units does not mean that they are under construction, and I wanted to clarify that. And thank you for those who sent that, those emails and the phone calls around clarifying that statement. So what we are seeing is that we are seeing an increase of planned units. It does not mean they're under construction. It does not necessarily mean that they'll ever be built. There are some of those who have been sitting for quite some time, for many years. But we wanted to at least have the conversation around that as we begin to think more critically about what's driving or some of the factors that may impact growth, what we're seeing is that those numbers are increasing in terms of planned development, but does not necessarily apples to apples in terms of, yes, because they're planned, does not necessarily mean that they're under construction. So we took those questions and clarified that, that particular slide. And then there was some questions about one of the options that we presented. And they wanted further clarification in terms of, well, could you move the district administrative office to the former church building, Welsh Valley, as one of your options as we thought about this process? And what we did is we brought in Gilbert Architects, and we had them to give us a really rough estimate in terms of what that would look like in moving the entire district administrative building and all of its services to currently Welsh Valley, and using that existing church and the rectory for our offices. And what we found out were several things. One, we found out that, number one, it would be if we moved the entire administrative office, the DAO, to Welsh Valley and the rectory, there's just simply not enough square footage to accommodate all the offices there. And you'll see a little bit of that as Pat Gannon talks about that in the next slide. So, and then there was the option of, well, could you take part of the DAO? Could you keep some of the services that are currently facilitated on Montgomery Ave, and then take part of that to that? And we talked about that. And number one, it doesn't, even if we did move that, it doesn't solve the larger issue in terms of making room for additional parking spots. And then we talk about some of the ways in which the services are provided in the buildings, the level of meetings we have, the privacy in terms of that conversation, whether or not we could replicate that. And we didn't think we could do that effectively. And we also, to say that, and not to save the best for last, we were really intentional in terms of future instructional space. And there are many who argue back and forth. And in the last 5 months, in terms of me thinking about this possibility, and I'm open to continue the conversation, but we are very committed to ensuring that we honor the flexibility that we have in the only space that we can control currently right now. So for potential growth, we, like every other entity who currently, as we navigate through the township, when we ask for a property, this is being held for X, Y, and Z. There's future development, there's a mission, there's a vision for this, there's a grand vision for that. We'd like the flexibility that has been afforded to others to say, Welsh Valley, that property for us is flexible space for growth in the event that we needed that, and are not ready to move forward with removing that off the table and occupying that. And when we looked at some of the cost of that property, the first column, the first top of the slide that you're looking at, initial cost estimates, is for those who've driven by, who are familiar with the church, just to bring the church to code would roughly cost us between $3 and $4 million. If you take a look at the cost of renovating that church in terms of the office space, the student services space, the educational space, the meeting space, the current professional development or professional learning that occurs in the DAO, we have a range between $6 to $7 million to bring that comparable to the services that we provide at the DAO. And then you're familiar with the rectory a little bit further in the back. If we were to use that rectory, which if we moved all members of the DAO, we would need the rectory, and that would be between $1.4 and $1.7 million. But if you remember in the previous slide, I shared with you that the square footage located in the church, the square footage for the rectory, would not accommodate all of our services being moved into that particular area. So then you're talking about whether or not you would contemplate building an addition to one of those particular, one of those particular structure, which is why one of the reasons why we did not recommend moving the DAO to the Welsh Valley. This slide we showed on the 17th. There was specific questions to could the district elaborate in terms of why those options are no longer under consideration. So in parentheses, we've tried to articulate some of the reasons, one of the reasons why some of the properties that we've looked at are no longer an option based on either zoning, whether there's future development, whether it's really about flexibility in terms of instructional space or operational efficiency. And of course, we think about cost in terms of those factors as well. And this is a new slide that was not part of the 17th presentation. And that came out of conversations or requests to say, well, we heard you, we might not have agreed with you, you say that you don't want to move to Welsh Valley for a myriad of reasons. How about moving the DAO to another location? Could you find a leasing office where we could move the DAO and use that existing space for future student parking and for future staff parking? And preliminarily, we got some information that we wanted to share with you tonight. We will continue to explore that as an option, and we'll revisit that in December 8th. But currently, right now, we are reviewing possible locations in the township. We've gotten preliminary numbers, and I say that they are preliminary in terms of the cost of a yearly lease. There are variables in terms of how long we are going to be able to hold the lease for and whether or not they'll have additional costs for that. What's not included in that cost, yearly cost, are conversations around networking, IT, infrastructure, the cost of actually moving individuals, and then fitting out and making sure that the space is appropriately available and will accommodate all of our space and the use for it. I mentioned to you earlier that we needed 21,000 square feet. We're looking for leasing space or exploring leasing space that could accommodate that so that we have all of our services under one umbrella, and we're not parsing out and having student services in one building a mile away and then another building another mile away in terms of that. So a new slide that gives a little bit of clarity to the previous presentation that we had that we wanted to share with you, and we will make sure that we bring that back to you if any more information is available to us. And here we try to give you another perspective in terms of what that would look like in terms of a very similar set of slides that you'll see in a little bit when Mr. Gananen comes up and looks at the other options. But we wanted to show you this display because it follows some of the same format we did on the 17th. And part of that is trying to illustrate for you in one snapshot what may be and what are some of the pros and cons of any of these particular options. And if you take a look at Matson Ford Road, and many of you have seen this, those numbers had not changed in terms of the range for Matson Ford Road, but what we wanted to emphasize more clearly in this presentation, that those dollar figures that you see in front of you does not include the cost for any temporary parking that may be needed to move buses to a temporary site to accommodate. It does not include any legal conversations or costs that may take place during that time, and other approval documentation or costs that will need it. So we wanted to make sure that as we present these numbers, that asterisk represents that there may be additional costs to that, and we're trying to bring that to as much as certainty as possible in terms of range. So what I want to do now is I want to ask Pat Gannon to come to the podium, and he will walk you through the previous options that we discussed on the 17th.
Thank you, Dr. Marseille. There are two items that are driving the need to find additional bus parking. The first of these is the expected need for more parking at Lower Merion High School, and that is being driven by the expected enrollment increase to be held here. And so if we were to find a place to move the buses currently parked at Lower Merion off the site, that would meet our projected requirement for parking. The other thing that's driving our need is buses that we will need in the future to transport students that we don't have yet, based on enrollment expansion. So adding those two things together, we're looking, all told, for a space for 36 to 39 buses. I showed this slide last time. We talked about some of the criteria that we use for looking for a suitable location for buses. First of all, we want to make sure that it's sufficient size so it makes sense to locate. We're currently in 3 locations. We'd rather not go to 4 locations or 5 locations, but certainly there's a certain critical mass you want to have for the number of buses to operate efficiently. Of course, you want to look for favorable zoning. Most of our township is zoned residential, so that takes a lot of options off the table for us. There's also the cost, of course. You want to be able to obtain the property at a reasonable cost. You want to consider the location of the property in relation to where all the students live. Most of the students in our district, 2/3, live in the eastern side of the district. And of course, we want to make sure that it's located in Lower Merion School District, and we're concerned with things like security and overall management of personnel and operational efficiency. So some of these same criteria that we look at in trying to find a location are also the challenges we run into. Where can you find a place that's large enough? Where can you find a place that's large enough and has the proper zoning, and that you could possibly get the use of for a reasonable cost? So all of these are things that we have been looking at the last few months. Let me talk more in detail now about our facility at Matson Ford Road. This is an aerial shot. There are 2 parcels here, one on the left, one on the right, and they're separated by a hill in the middle. And our idea of a way to increase the ability to park buses here is to construct a parking deck immediately behind our shop building and take advantage of that grade change. In other words, we can cut back into that hill. We can have a double row of parking on the ground level. We can build a deck above it, and we can access that deck from the upper parking lot. This is an engineer's concept of how that would look like. We believe this may provide parking for an additional 20 buses, but no more. So therefore, it does not provide a total solution to our challenge. It will require a PennDOT permit. It will require Lower Merion Township land development approval, and those are in process. We have completed a traffic study and submitted that to the township as well as to PennDOT. And in addition, we've reached out to our neighboring municipalities, West Conshohocken Borough and Upper Merion, and provided the same information to them. We're currently scheduled for our first land development hearing on December 1st in front of the Lower Merion Township Planning Commission. That date may change, and if it does, we will post that information immediately on our website. The timeline we're looking at here with respect to not only the Matson Ford Road deck, but the other option that has to go along with that to solve the whole problem is shown on this slide. We're working backwards from a need for having additional classrooms ready on the Lower Merion High School site in the summer of 17 for the 17-18 school year. So we'll be doing renovations to the second and third floor of the district administration office. We predict that will take roughly a year, maybe 13 months. When that project starts in June of 16, we want to have the buses off the site because by then enrollment will have increased, but we also need to create laydown space for the contractor. So our goal is to get those off the site at that time. So that means that between now and that time, we have roughly 18 months to identify another location and then go through the process of acquiring it, going through any land development approvals, design, bidding, and construction for any improvements that we might make. So in order to be ready for June of 16, we would want to start in January of 15. So I'm going to talk now about an option that was not talked about in great detail last time, but is one that we are no longer considering. And the superintendent did refer to this a little bit earlier with respect to the Welsh Valley property. This chart is broken into two. As we mentioned earlier, our solution is going to be Matson Ford Road deck plus something else. And so we've shown Matson Ford Road at the top here with some of the advantages and disadvantages. We do own the property. That's an advantage. We seem to have some support from commissioners. However, we do have to do the construction. It will not give us a total solution. We have been told by the neighboring municipalities that they will oppose this expansion, and we will require temporary space while this deck is being constructed. One supplement to this would be to park some buses at Welsh Valley. And we, in fact, could park up to 25 buses at Welsh Valley. This is a layout of what that might look like using the former church property. The outline of the church building is on the left, and what's shown on the right is that we would add roughly 21,000 square feet of impervious surface to provide parking for 25 buses and the associated drivers. You can see right away here that one of the disadvantages of this is that we would lose about 1/3 of our future playing field that we plan to create as part of the current expansion at Welsh Valley. The biggest reason we would not want to do this is the same thing that the superintendent outlined earlier, is that it is important for the district to maintain flexibility with being able to expand educational space. By educational space, I mean a place to build a building with more classrooms. This is the property that we own. This is the only flexibility that we have, so we prefer not to look and put buses at this site. So I'm going to review some of the other options that were discussed last week. Again, many are a combination of the Matson Ford Road deck, which again is a deck for parking cars, which frees up space on the surface for additional buses. So the first one would be to combine additional bus parking at Harriton. There are two pictures on this slide from Harriton that show how this might be accomplished. The one on the left is a shot of the actual bus parking location. And it shows how we might be able to double park a row of buses and get 7 additional buses parked. And this would be on pavement that already exists. The second picture shows how we might expand that whole bus parking area to add another 15 bus parking spaces, and that would provide a total of 25. This, again, would require land development approval. Currently, our approval that we receive for the new high school limits us to 25 buses. Another option would be to combine with the Matson Ford Road deck a parking deck at Lower Merion High School. I mentioned earlier that one of the drivers is to create additional parking at Lower Merion High School. This would be a way to do it and not move buses from the site. This is a conceptual drawing of how such a parking deck might look. On the west side of the administration building, there is a parking lot, and right below it, shown there in the dark red line, is a retaining wall. And the retaining wall retains earth. There's about a 12 or 13 foot drop, and right below that retaining wall is where our buses are currently parked. We could build a deck out over that bus parking area plus the parking lot next to it, and we could access that deck from the upper parking lot back and forth, and that would allow us to achieve the parking spaces we would need to overcome the projected deficit, and it would allow buses to remain on site. Just looking at some of the disadvantages of that, it would increase congestion, it would require land development approval, obviously, and we would have to find a place to park buses and most likely some cars off the site while the construction is in progress. The next option is to combine with Matson Ford Road deck the idea of eliminating student parking at Lower Marion. And by reducing the student parking, you've then created the spaces you need to satisfy future demand. Don't have a picture to show here. Obviously, it would require some zoning relief because the zoning code does require us to provide parking for students of driving age. It would require amending our current condition of approval, and would also have the potential to create congestion within the neighborhood should students who can't park on campus try to park in the neighborhood. Another option is to combine the Matson Ford Road parking deck with the acquisition and use of property on Woodbine Avenue. This property is located Woodbine Avenue in Belmont Hills. It is directly across the road from the Township Kegel Complex where the trash transfer station is and the Public Works trucks are parked. It's currently being used as a vehicle storage area, landscape material storage area, and it would afford us the opportunity to park some buses. It does have some issues related to steep slope, and it has issues related to zoning. It is zoned residential, so that's one of the major disadvantages of that option. Another property which could solve our problem in and of itself is to acquire property on Riders Ferry Road. This is an overhead shot of property along the Schuylkill River that's located at the bottom of Riders Ferry Road in Bala Cynwyd. You can see that the Schuylkill Expressway goes across from left to right, paralleling the train tracks. On the left-hand side of the property is property owned by O'Neill Property Group. And the site is currently under development for 500 units of apartments. The industrial building that's shown there now has been taken down and construction is underway. Ironically, the photo also shows our buses being stored there on a temporary basis while the high schools were being built. So we have operated from that location and worked out well for us. But the property we would be interested in is located on the right-hand side, currently owned by Penn Real Estate. We've identified a section of about 4.5 acres that we think we might be able to use and would solve our problem for parking buses. We do not plan to try to acquire the Penn Real Estate headquarters or anything to do with the health club, which is a health club plus a rehab center, et cetera. The zoning is favorable on this site. However, we don't own it. That's one major disadvantage. And also it's located in a floodplain, so we have to figure out how to overcome any limitations that might be there. Lastly, we're looking at the St. Charles Seminary property. This is an overhead shot of it. I think you're all aware that the seminary is in the process of selling off some of its land. And so our thought was that there might be an opportunity for us to get some of that land to use for bus parking. However, since we met last week, we've been contacted by the seminary, and they have directed us, or basically informed us, that they would not consider in any way a proposal to use the seminary property for school bus parking.
Excuse me, if I could read the full statement that we were given by Mr. Davis, the representative of the seminary. On Friday night, I spoke with Mr. Davis, a representative of St. Charles Seminary. Mr. Davis wanted to correct a misimpression contained in a recent Mainline Times article suggesting the possibility of using part of the seminary property for school bus parking. He stated that the seminary would not consider in any way such a proposal. I think that, plus the zoning of this property, makes this property not a viable option at this time, and I would, at this point, suggest that that it be taken off the table.
So to wrap this up, this slide provides a summary of the options that we've been looking at. The first option is a new one that the superintendent described earlier, and that is to construct the deck at Matson Ford Road to accommodate future buses and then to achieve the additional parking at Lower Merion High School by moving the administration into leased space. And the idea there was the buses currently parked at Lower Merion would remain at Lower Merion. Then we have the options of the Matson Ford Road deck combined with Harriton, with a parking deck at Lower Merion, with eliminating or reducing student parking at Lower Merion, and then acquiring the Woodbine property. And then lastly, we talked about the Writers Ferry property and of course the St. Charles property. And these are approximate costs that are shown here. Our plan for next step is to continue the dialogue. We will meet again on December 8th to listen to public comment. We'll evaluate the public comment and we'll share information via our website. Are there any questions I could answer for the board?
Thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate it. I'd just like to let people know that there were some additional slides from the last presentation of November 17th, but these slides are already on the website, and the latest presentation will be on the website, I would expect tomorrow. So that information is available on the website. The purpose of this meeting really is to give the community opportunity to give us feedback. So, but I do want to give the board opportunity, if anyone has any questions that they feel they need to ask at this time, please do so. Go ahead, Marissa.
I'm also anxious to hear from everyone here, but since some of this is new information, is St. Charles still an option as if we were to use that for classroom space or a school? And then put buses at Wells Valley, or is it not? They wouldn't consider that either.
It's not a viable option at this time.
Are there other questions? Diane?
Yeah, thank you guys for the presentation, the updated slides. Just a couple quick questions. On slide 13, there's a footnote at the bottom that says cost of temporary parking, legal cost approvals. Are those costs out of the operating budget, or would they be out of the?
I'm sorry, which slide was that?
I think it's 13.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, it'll have.
It is, it's 13.
It shows up a couple times. See at the bottom of the footnote.
Right, it is something that we added to make it clear that
Right.
those costs were
So I guess my question is more for Mr. Orlando. Do those costs, can they be wrapped into the borrowing costs, or do those costs come out of the operating costs?
The, probably the legal and the approval costs could come out of a capital fund. The temporary parking probably would not have to come out of our general fund.
Okay, so that has to be factored in terms of
We have to factor it in.
our
Anything
budget.
related to the construction could come out of capital projects.
And temporary parking couldn't?
I don't believe that would fit that criteria. We didn't use last time we did temporary parking also came out of the general fund.
Okay. And then on slide 21, it looks to me like with little, other than maybe the installation of some fencing, we could put 11 buses on the Welsh Valley site without affecting the fields and without any, other than some very minor costs, without a large amount of cost. Is that correct? It looks like that, right backing up to the back of the building there, it looks like there's 11 spots drawn out for.
You're correct, there is some space there. I would want to go back and look at the work that was done by our engineer to lay it out to see if we actually looked at that option.
Okay.
I think we looked at something similar to that, but, so I really can't answer that right now.
Okay, so, and this ties in with my last question, which has to do with slide, the final slide, which says that we have to have our solution by December 15th. And, my question there is, oh, actually, it's not on that slide anymore, sorry. That was on the previous one. Well, all right, well, regardless of the date by which we have to make this, I mean, if we find ourselves in a situation where we don't have the answer in the time that we need to have it, is the use, is the use of these 11 spots an opportunity to perhaps buy some time? And then, if it does become apparent that we need this space for educational flexibility or some other purpose, possibly revisiting either the Lower Merion site or the Harriton site as, it's more just a suggestion than really, I'm not really looking for a response there, but, judging from that slide, which may or may not be accurate at this point, it looks like we may be able to buy ourselves some time should we find ourselves in a position where we don't have the answer by the time we need to have it.
Right, I can tell you that just like this option to put 25 buses, it would require new land development because our current land development that we have, land development approval for the expansion of Welsh Valley does not include any bus parking. And in addition, the contract that we've signed for the work at Welsh Valley includes demolishing the rectory, so we have until April to make a decision as to whether
Right,
we
but
want to
none of
save
this
that
would
or not.
affect any of that because that's already hardtop that exists.
It is, but I believe you'd still need land development approval.
Dr. Van Lynch?
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. My question is along those lines with regard to the use of Welsh Valley for instructional purposes. And I wanted to ask Dr. Marseille to speak a bit more about the implications of not having Welsh Valley available for future instructional use, particularly given the size of our elementary schools as well as our middle schools. So if you could speak to that a bit more, it'd be helpful. Thank you.
Well, I said it before in the 17th that, and I think this board are open to having conversations about possibilities, and that's why we're having this conversation. As my 5 months in this position, talking about busing, a lot more than I thought I'd be talking about busing, and trying to get an understanding of previous administrative decisions and the landscape with regards to development and potential development in the future of this community. And what raised alarm for me was not having that as a flexible space. And that uncertainty made me think about, well, if things are not looking up now, and it seems that in my short period of time where there hasn't been a laundry list of options, I'd be very hard-pressed, and though I understand Mrs. Aventuro's statement with regards to if we get to a point where we have no other options, I hope we don't get to that point, would we be willing to continue having a conversation? I'm always willing to have and continue to have a conversation. But when you think about our elementary enrollment and the rate at which it is growing, you think about the current space we have. Welsh Valley is really an opportunity for us to have flexibility in an area that we don't have any flexibility. That is on my last on my list in terms of making very difficult decisions about that process. So I think it's extremely important that as individuals think about their future and the future of developments in other areas, that we think about our future and whether or not 2 years from now, will we be in a different place? Maybe, maybe not. We can continue to have that conversation. Looking at the enrollment numbers, I believe it's going to continue to go up. And I'd like the opportunity to have Welsh Valley so that if we do need to expand, whether it's a learning center, a kindergarten center, elementary center, that we have that option with that space.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up on that real quickly. You know, in terms of long-term planning, the building as it is right now will cost $3 to $7 million to make it usable for 35 staff members. So if we, and I think, you know, I think there's definitely some prudence in making sure that we have that as a flexible opportunity. But the thing I think we all need to remember is, if we go down that route and we find we need the extra space, we are looking at $20, $30 million in spending to make that space usable. Now, it may be our only choice, and that's money we have to spend if we want to solve the problem. But I think it's important that we keep the cost of all these options in our head as we're going through this. And I know that we are. I'm just saying, no one has spoken to the long-term cost of having to build space on that site should we need it for educational purposes.
And of course, we had looked at that site for a kindergarten center before deciding to build at other elementary schools, Gladwin and Penn Valley. So we do have some estimates on that. Are there other questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, for the Welsh Valley renovations, you put like a bottom line of like 3 to 4 million. Can you just give some examples, if you have them, of we would have to do X, we'd have to do Y, we'd have to do Z, just to get that $3 to $4 million baseline spend? Is that
Right. I'll just address the church building. The building needs to be brought up to code. For anything we use it for, it would need to be brought up to current code, and that's what that cost is for right there. The building is not accessible, so we would have to make it accessible, meet the code requirements for accessibility. One concept we look at is to remove the front vestibule and build a new vestibule, if you will, that would have a proper entrance that would be accessible, plus an elevator that would reach both the floors. And it would have accessible restrooms. The restrooms in there are not currently accessible. There's some fire sprinklers that will have to be added. And while not a code violation, or code issue, the HVAC system is at the end of its useful life right now. So that's some of the things you would have to look at just at the start.
Okay, Mrs. Pollard?
Dr. Marseille, could you just emphasize just one aspect of what the challenge would be for our administrators being moved from the DAO to an off-site facility?
We've been talking about that, and I think when we look at the Welsh Valley, we knew that that was an option that was dear to our hearts in terms of keeping flexibility. And now we're talking about, could you, if we did remain steadfast in that commitment, and we were asked to take a look at what would it look like if we found a property that could house 21,000 square feet. So, you know, I think from the perspective of could we operate, if we were all under one roof, similar services, yes, we could do that. I think that there'd be further conversation about whether or not some soft costs in terms of the fact that wherever this property might be very different. We enjoy the proximity of the DAO, a building that we just recently spent some considerable dollars in terms of renovating. And I know that there's no such thing as empty space when it comes to an instructional setting, but I'm sure we can find uses for that. But it's really about underusage and how long will that continue, considering that we have spent several $1 million renovating that particular building. The previous recommendations of splitting the services were extremely problematic. So the idea that you would have to, our parents or our community members would have to go to different buildings for different services, really threw that as a non-option. But as recently as the other day, we did look into property that could house the entire building. So I would like to have the opportunity to come back to the board after a week of processing that, since we just received that, to give you more information on some of those other implications.
Ms. Ackman?
That's my question, so thank you for, further articulating, Dr. Marseille.
Okay. Is there anyone else? Dr. O'Leary?
Would some of these solutions not require temporary parking if they were combined in one order or another?
The construction of a parking deck, either at Matson Ford Road or at Lower Marion High School, would by necessity require creating some space to do the construction, which means you're going to have to move vehicles off-site. So that is going to have temporary parking. If you look at the option of taking away student parking, that's easy. No temporary parking. If you look at acquiring another property such as Writers Ferry Road, there would be no temporary parking associated with that.
Any other questions at this time? Okay. So what we'd like to do now, thank you again, Pat, is take public comment. So we're going to ask everybody to please come up now and sign in with Ms. LaPera. I understand there already are people who have signed in, but if anybody else wants to speak on this issue, please come up now and sign in. Once we have everybody signed in, Ms. LaPera will call your name. When you come up to the podium, please state your name and generally where you live. You don't have to give us your exact address, but generally where you live. And then you'll have 3 minutes to give your comments.
Sorry, watch your step, please. Okay, sorry. Ms. Fine? I think I saw already. Mr. Davis? Mr. D'Aquila? And then Mr. Hamilton, Mr. Moog, and Miss Keith.
Dan D'Aquila, Wynwood Civic Association. I live in Wynwood. Thank you, Dr. Marseille, Dr. Gilbert, for the opportunity in the board to be able to speak here tonight. So first, I guess, let me just start with some suggestions after listening to Mr. Ganon's great slide presentation. One suggestion, have you thought for the DAO, have you thought about open office space planning for the DAO if you go into new space, that you can get a lot better density, 65 people and 21,000 square feet, that's over 300 and, I don't know, about 320 or 330 square feet per person. Open office plan, which is becoming quite popular. If you just go, if you see on the Google or Facebook websites, they promote it, and it's mainstream architecture now for office space. You can get that number down to 200 square feet per person, and that would cost a lot less for lease space and or if you're renovating your own properties or one of a district's own property. So just keep that in mind. That can get that lease number way down. I guess my biggest concern with Wynwood Civic and our neighbors is really around the two options are on there that were shown relative to a parking deck at Lower Marion High School and the potential of banning student parking at Lower Marion High School. And I'll get to why those are our biggest concerns. But as far as the process, so I hate to bring up history, I know it's counterproductive, but this does seem very reminiscent of what we went through with the school choice, expanding the school choice. And reason in being is because when we went through that process, we kept asking for the process to be delayed or slowed down so we can understand all the costs and understand all the impact, and this is exactly where we are again now. So once again, please, if we could do that, it would be beneficial. We wanted to have two schools of the same size. We know we don't have that now. but at least now could we try to not over-congest Lower Marion High School? That's our biggest concern, and it's our concern from safety and from just not on the campus, but getting to the campus and in the district and in the surrounding neighborhoods. Vehicle safety, pedestrian safety, and this is only going to get, as the population increases, it's only going to get worse. And we really feel that both of those options really do not go in the right direction for safety. So to summarize, the health of the community surrounding Lower Marion High School is being ignored. We please do the right thing and do not push for rushed approval before all impact is known and resolved. Do not take the surrounding community of Lower Marion High School for granted, and proceed with the further you may proceed with the further densification of Lower Marion High School campus. Congestion and safety issues are real, and decisions that ignore this fact will have detrimental impact to the student and resident safety in the area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Denise, who's next?
Thank you. My name is Perry Hamilton. I live at Penn Road in Wynwood. And many of us have commented on how much we don't like to have to rehash same old history, but the circumstances force us to do it, and it's a shame. More than 10 years ago, the proposal to build new high schools was highly contentious and unprecedentedly divisive. The school district's response at that time was to come up with what was called the CAC, the CAC, Community Advisory Council. It was a process to resolve disputes. It reached out to all factions of stakeholders across the township, and quite honestly, it was a wonderful process because it worked. Many stakeholders from all over the township came before the school board and agreed with the recommendations of the CAC, and we were all pretty much together as a community on building 2 new high schools of equal size. And it was done for a variety of concerns, but chief among them was the primary mission of the Lower Marion School District, which is to educate children. And we had world-class experts come to the CAC and advise us at that time that the best way to educate our children was 2 equal same high schools, Lower Marion and Harriton. And that's the way it was meant to be. Based on those recommendations, the school board built 2 equal, relatively same high schools to be used that way. It puzzles many of us that it's not happened that way, that it hasn't been carried out that way. It puzzles many of us that the site that's actually overcongested and overused is actually the smaller of the 2 properties, which is at the same time a bifurcated property. I would recommend that we should decongest the lot here at the Lower Marion High School for the sake of fiscal responsibility, so that we use our overhead assets responsibly. For the sake of safety, we're noticing a higher incidence of pedestrian accidents. And finally, for your primary mission, to better educate the children of Lower Marion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moog?
Good evening. I'm Roger Moog from Ballackinwood. I represent the Ballackinwood Neighborhood Club Board. And first of all, I want to say that we at the board of the Neighborhood Club appreciate the school district's transportation predicament, if we are to assume the projections are accurate, and the work that has been done to look at the alternatives that we talked about tonight, and none of which seem to be aggressively egregious to the Ballackinwood neighborhood, by the way. But concerning concentrating more bus storage in eastern end of the township, I'd just like to offer some sort of macroscopic overview comments. As most of us already know, traffic is very bad along City Avenue in Ballackinwood and Ardmore, for example, and not only in the rush hour, but midday. I find that out because I'm retired and I travel on the midday. I thought I would avoid the traffic, but that's not the case. Development is occurring where density already exists, like City Avenue and Ardmore, for example. And that's thanks to not only the regional trends in growth in traffic in this corridor, in this area of Main Line, but also the rezoning that has occurred in Bala Cynwyd, City Avenue, in Ardmore, in various industrial areas of the township, permitting higher and higher density, sometimes 3 times the density that's now there. What really concerns me as a retired traffic engineer is that there is really no expectation of federal or state funds to improve the roadway system to deal with the additional traffic that is occurring now and will occur in the future. The Congress hasn't increased infrastructure spending in over 16 years. The state of Pennsylvania is preoccupied with repairing bridges that are falling down. We have more than any other state in the country. The township's allocation of funds for highway improvements is de minimis at best. There is no priority program dollars for the eastern portion of the township for highway and transit improvements in the DVRPC regional plan through the year 2040. This traffic is only going to burden the whole community and stretch further west into the rest of the township as time goes forward. Moving more buses in, or basing them in the eastern part of the township will only add to this long-term problem. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Miss Keith, Joan Keith, and then Ruth Jenkins, Gordon Henry, and Brody Stevens.
Okay, thank you, John Keith, Winwood. Many of my points were made by the previous 2 speakers, so, but I would like to emphasize I thought they were very good points. And I'm not sure if I'm able to get questions answered here, but there's a couple of things that I'm curious about. 12/15 is a date. One of the board members brought this up. It sounds like you're trying to make recommendations for a capital plan by 12/15. With the options I saw on the board, it doesn't seem that you can make a prudent decision in that period of time, given the kind of commitments you're trying to make for the area. Some of the assumptions are unclear too. The enrollment in Lower Marion, I've seen 1147 for here in a snapshot, and I've seen much more disparate numbers. Do we have access to your enrollment projections today and going forward? And can you tell me?
They're on the website.
Okay, and are they, because I only saw 100 student difference in the projection on the board. In the chart I saw, it was just 100 over the blue line. Is that correct?
Yes, plus 104.
Plus 104. That doesn't
For
seem
that particular
to
year.
be, if those were the numbers you're operating with, I'm troubled trying to understand why we're in this predicament right now, other than the load between the 2 schools. And if you are an advice trying to make capital decisions and you've got a capacity issue and you've got capacity at another school, I understand that's a very complex point, but that is a more fluid decision for you in the meantime until you can figure out, hopefully, a more permanent solution. So I'm drawing attention to the fact that you've kind of put this 12/15 date with some numbers, and if I were standing in front of any of my clients, I would say you've got yourself in a box, and you can't make capital decisions like that, especially when you may be able to reload some of the students. So I think your decisions around enrollment are backing into some of these decisions, just as the speaker 2 earlier said, and you know, we can call this a crisis now, but there are other answers to that crisis in terms of rebalancing the load.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Ruth Jenkins.
Ruth Jenkins, Winwood, Pennsylvania, Winwood, PA, right here. There's only one discussion, basically before a big vote on December 15th, and as the gentleman before me stated, I think that it's too soon to make such a big decision with not enough information before we go forward. I also think that you're looking for permanent solutions for what might be a temporary problem, and that maybe we should think about temporary solutions. We're projecting 12 to 17 buses for some future date. So the decision to open the choice zone has resulted in a series of unfortunate events. Some of them are overcrowding over here at the Lower Merion High School, traffic out of control, monies that are going to be spent on the administration building. We paid for 2 equal high schools, and now you want to build again on an overcrowded site to create more chaos in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gordon Henry.
Good evening. My name is Gordon Henry. I'm a director of the North Ardmore Civic Association Board of Directors member, and I live next door at 209 Worcester Road in Ardmore, right behind the high school. I've attended many meetings of these, perhaps echoing some of the sentiment of Perry Hamilton over I think a dozen years. I've lived in the neighborhood 17 years. And honestly, I've never felt deceived by this board as I do now with the broken promises. I stood here in your August meeting, and my wife stood here in the July meeting, and we were told unequivocally by this board there would not be a parking garage at Lower Merion High School. I asked the question, we had a similar presentation, it was very explicit, and we were told no. And now you're changing your mind because you didn't get the answers in the other places you like to. This has been just one more of a string of broken promises by this board and this administration and previous administrations. As you've heard tonight, we were told there were going to be 2 high schools of equal size. It turns out now we have 400 more kids here that you convinced this neighborhood to accept. Then when the schools were modernized, you told us absolutely no more than 24 buses, although Patrick Gadane didn't say explicitly there was going to be more than 24 buses. Don't tell me that building a parking deck doesn't mean you might put more buses there, because you will. Then after we accepted the 400 kids in the neighborhood, now you're talking about building a parking garage. Again, after we were told at least twice when I was in the room or my wife was in the room that we wouldn't have it. Broken promise about the schools, broken promise about the buses, broken promises about the parking garages. And you expect us to have faith in this board that you're going to do the right thing. I'll tell you what's happening. You're looking at these other locations. People are showing up in this room. They're complaining, and you're saying, I'm going to take that off the list. I know you say zoning and these other reasons. The reality is you don't want to take the political pressure of putting it in some of these inconvenient places, and so you're dumping on Ardmore. That's what we feel is happening. The Ardmore neighborhood has accepted more than our fair share of the burden of the schools, of the cars and the buses. Residents are leaving. I'll tell you, I've spoken to people. Residents are leaving this neighborhood because they can't deal with the noise, the congestion, the kids smoking on their property, and the kids parking in their neighborhood. I know you have difficulty finding other locations. Try again and try harder. Stop dumping on Ardmore. Ask the rest of the township to share the burden, and find some other places where you can do this, so we don't need to have more buses and more cars and parking decks in our neighborhood. We already have more than our share of the burden right here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Stevens. Is it Tony Lame?
Hi, I'm Brody Stevens. I live on Schoolhouse Lane, directly across from the school. I'm also a member of the North Ardmore Civic Association Board. Many of my comments have already been addressed, but I did want to reiterate and share a few of the concerns that I share with some of the previous speakers. The first is certainly congestion. I think the goal should be to mitigate that on the site, and a couple of the proposals here clearly would exacerbate the problem rather than mitigate it. As a previous speaker mentioned, the parking garage is long-term capital. We don't know if enrollment is in fact going to be a long-term problem or a cyclical one. In relation to that, I had a question related to Mr. Ganane's presentation regarding the need for the additional buses. I didn't see anything in there, or perhaps I missed it, regarding when those buses would be needed. And I think it goes to another of the school board members' comments about potentially using the Welsh Valley site as a temporary site for less than all of the additional buses, if you might be able to phase in those new buses. Are they really all going to be needed for the 2017 school year, or are those additional buses going to be phased in over a period of time that the enrollment increases? I guess I'd also like to speak just briefly on behalf of my very close neighbors on Schoolhouse Lane. When you talk about a parking deck at the high school, has not been, to my knowledge, any real presentation of what that would look like in terms of the grade of the property relative to Schoolhouse Lane. When you look at it in my non-expert eyes, it certainly looks like the deck would extend out at an elevation that is equivalent to either the second floor window or higher than the homes on Schoolhouse Lane. And then the school property is higher than that even, so that it would seem to me that cars on a parking deck at night would be shining right into the windows of the second floor of homes on Schoolhouse Lane. And I realize that that could be mitigated, but it's hard to imagine that it could be really fully mitigated. And I haven't seen any discussion of that type of impact. And I would also just like to comment briefly in my own home. I feel that some of the lighting around the school is impactful of my home, and I feel like I've been a cooperative neighbor, but I think that it opens up the possibility of looking at the total impacts of the school on Schoolhouse Lane as it stands today. And when you start to really kind of open that can of worms, it just gives me some concern that we'll have to take a broader look at the impact of the school on our properties. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony Lane. And then we have Philip Browndius, Mark Froman, and Daniel Marion.
Good evening. My name is Tony Lame. I live on Worcester Road. I am a 40-year resident of this neighborhood. I am the incoming president of the Wynwood Civic Association. I am here to tell you that it's a remarkable turnout here tonight, given that this is Thanksgiving week. And I have to tell you that as far as our group is concerned, we learned of this kind of fast-track pace that you guys are on sort of by the back door, and managed to rally a number of people to come here tonight to tell you that increased densification of Lower Merion High School is really something that you guys should not be considering. This neighborhood is a highly residential neighborhood. It has been asked and has been willing to work with the school board over a number of years to be a good neighbor and support our schools, and now you're asking us to do it again. And I think it's unfair and it's unreasonable, and it's not spreading the burden across the township. This is all, again, as other people have said, goes back to originally we thought we were going to have 2 equal high schools. You guys decided that you wanted to change that, and now you're dealing with piecemeal approaches to handling that. And we urge you to take more time, not make a final decision on December 15th. This is all during a holiday period where it's very difficult for people to come out. People have plans, people are traveling. And to do it, and do it in this time period, I think lacks transparency, and I would urge you to give more time. Certainly it seems like you have at least been willing to consider other alternatives and respond to the community's respect on that, and I think you need to give it more time and get more answers. And I would appreciate it if you would do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Browning?
Good evening, members of the school board. My name is Philip Browndies. I live in Wynwood. For several months now, the school administration has acknowledged that it has not adequately projected student enrollment in the coming years. It was just a few short years ago, and over $230 million later, that we were told that mistakes were made. Even last week, the school administration could not get its facts right about the amount of new construction in the township when it sent out a letter to property owners. What I would like to know is, how could this board get it so wrong? But I guess I'll never know because you don't provide meeting minutes with this transcript of testimony. My comments tonight will not be part of the record, and for some unknown reason, you won't broadcast this meeting in real time because, I know, it must be technical difficulties. Any solution to this parking problem, whether it's building a parking deck or buying additional property, should be taken out of the tens of millions of dollars this school board holds in reserve, rather than yet another tax increase on us. My modest proposal to alleviate overcrowding in our schools is to discourage our local realtors from using the schools as a selling point for property in the township. Just recently, Radnor and Tredyffrin schools scored higher in tests in Lower Merion. The high price we pay for our schools does not correlate with better educated students. As we know, there is no penalty for the incompetence by the school administration. They may be immune to any liability, but members of this board are up for re-election in 2015. We will remember your decision on this important issue when it's time to vote in November. Let the voters of Lower Merion decide if we can take another tax increase next year for this proposal. Act 1, signed into law in 2006, allows for voter referendum on property tax increases. But that has never happened in this township because your lawyers have always found a backdoor to Harrisburg each year. But that doesn't make it right. Let's be open and transparent about it. If we are to pay for the mistakes of this board and administration with higher taxes, then let the voters of Lower Merion decide in a referendum in May 2015. So will you, Ms. Gilbert? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'll just point out that the referendum question comes after a certain amount of tax raises, which we haven't done. So that's when it goes to referendum. But so it's really not our decision unless we raise taxes higher than the referendum amount. Just pointing that out. Who's the next speaker?
Mr. Froman, then Daniel Marion.
Hi, I'm Daniel Marine. I'm a resident of Wynwood, and I guess the first thing I'd like to do is thank you for your service. I realize that you spent a lot of time doing this, and so I do really appreciate that. And I was here 10 years ago, and as it turns out, the emergency meeting was also right around Thanksgiving. So I think that's why there's some specific pain regarding timeframes. But that aside, I'm much more of somebody who's focused on facts, and I'm not a traffic engineer. I was standing on the corner of Owen Road and Montgomery with my 9-year-old son, who watched as the car hit the woman and sent her flying through the air. So, and I am the father of a 6-year-old who was almost hit by a car turning around in our driveway. So, I do have a keen interest in this, but I decided I'd look at the numbers. And if we look at it, there are on average 2.4 deadly accidents in Lower Merion Township per year. That means that since 2003, there's been 24 accidents. Of those deadly accidents, 3 of them, 13%, have occurred between Penn Road and Schoolhouse Lane. Schoolhouse Lane, Church Road, Penn Road. So 13%. In addition, if you look at just what's happened, and those are just deadly accidents where somebody has actually died. Since school started in September, there have been 10 pedestrian-involved accidents. Of those 10 pedestrian-involved accidents, 2 of them have occurred, again, Owen Road and Church Road. And as part of that, and appreciating the volunteer nature, I actually volunteered for the Wynwood Civic Association, and I know that you've all, as well as Chief McGrath, have received presentations from me regarding these issues, of which I'll let you know that presentation was given in October before the accident at the corner of Church Road. And if you read that presentation carefully, it predicted it in very close proximity to what actually probably happened. So I would say to you that I would turn this upside down and say, Not should we be adding buses? Should we be adding students and traffic here? But should we be taking them away? And will that decision only happen once a student gets killed or hurt? Because I see administrators and others rushing to the corner to find out if it was a student that was hit. And I understand why. But it doesn't matter if it's a student or somebody who is just passing by. It is equally as important. And I think that the entire township can share that burden. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Rosa Sirota, Ms. Schreiber, and Ms. Tully.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good evening, Rosa Sirota, Winwood. I think I spoke to you previously about the impact on education, students of Lower Merion, and I continue to think that's the hugest problem here. I mean, disparity between student growth at both schools has a huge impact on learning and the situation in the schools for the students each day, and that concerns me. What also concerns me is I think I've never heard so many folks state so clearly what the issues are on this site. And I will again invite all the school board members, all of you, to visit this site in the morning when the buses leave the students off, and especially at the end of the day when our students leave the complex. You may notice that students are sitting on those buses for at least some of them a half an hour before they can even leave the site. That's the extent, and that's before the buses get into the total neighborhood and throughout the township. So that's just a bit of the problem on this site. But I think that through the years, I've come to this podium over and over again, and I've seen so many changes on this site, and you are rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic here. And you're going to have many more accidents off the site, and you're going to have problems in the building, and you're going to have problems in the neighborhood. So you need to think seriously of what you are doing with this site. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tanya Schreiber and I live in Penwyn. I hope there's still a chance to step back and evaluate the overall situation and see if there might be more creative solutions that benefit our whole community. I wonder what efforts we are making to evaluate our school busing system. Why are students that live a few blocks away from a school with sidewalks connecting them getting bused? At high school, why was a student that lived a block away offered a parking pass? There is too much traffic and we are only talking about adding more. Parents claim that extracurriculars do not run on a schedule supported by busing, so without a car to take them, children simply can't participate. Without a private car, kids are excluded from activities. That is a sad statement and an awful burden to put on these families. Partly because of this, the township requires a certain level of student parking, but as they discuss traffic issues and sustainability efforts in their community meetings, I wonder what the school district could do to teach our children and staff alternative transportation systems for their student and faculty to ensure the nearby residential streets are not used. The train is an unattractive option because the walk from the Ardmore or 5-stop is too far for administrators and teachers. But how much or how little would it cost to provide a shuttle from that train a few blocks away? Is there a similar opportunity at Harriton? I encourage you to at least explore the possibility that some people might be more eager to use SEPTA if this was offered. Finally, as we sit here and discuss the school district's need for space, I hope you can revisit the possibility of using the old Narberth Elementary School. While this was evaluated decades ago, a new school or office in a walkable community could take a lot of pressure off of a transportation department as well as the school district's need for space. The finances might not have made this an attractive option in the 90s, but if the school district still has the right to that property, it might be worthwhile to reevaluate.
This needs more time, and if ultimately we need the additional 12 to 15 buses and or 79 parking spaces, then I'm glad we're exploring options. But more research might help us better understand other options available. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Tully, okay. Denise Michi, David Michi, and Sarah Slattery.
Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Denise Michi. Speak into the mic. I am your next door neighbor. We live at 214 Roberts Road. We have lived at that property for 11 years. And 10 out of those 11 were consumed with construction. And I can't tell you what it's like to live beside a school that's being built, construction and dust and jackhammers. But we did what we thought was right. We did what we thought was fair. And now, after a small reprieve, we're being asked again to consider more construction, and this time a parking structure. And while I can't articulate what this feels like to us, maybe I can tell you what my son said to me tonight when he learned that yet we had to attend another meeting about school construction. He said, "Mom, it's just not fair." And I ask you, please, to take the words of the child into consideration when you deliberate. It is fundamentally unfair to ask us to live now, not only with more construction and displacement and jackhammers, but to live with the legacy of a parking lot beside my house. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. As you remember, I spoke last Monday evening. David Michi, 214 Roberts Road, Ardmore. I do want to begin with one question that was touched on earlier. What is the disposition of the Narberth Elementary School at this time?
I understand that you answer questions after so it's not to interfere with the 3 minutes, so go ahead.
Okay.
You have your question.
Question number one. Question two is, I was really rather upset with some of the other public comments that were made last Monday. One of which was from the gentleman from Bala-Cynwyd that basically said, well, the people in this neighborhood chose to live next to a high school and they should put up with a parking garage. I find that horrendously insulting. This is a neighborhood that has taken it on the chin for decades. And I'm just very upset that people say, the typical Lower Merion, not in my backyard mentality. Well, it's about time people should step up and start shouldering more of the burden. They certainly enjoy the benefits of the Lower Merion School District, but they don't want any of the inconveniences. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Yes, my name's Sarah Slattery, but I ask that you wait for the clock because I'm going to actually defer my minutes. I will write to you privately because we have a lawyer hired by Lower Merion for the Wynwood Civic, paid by Wynwood Civic dollars, and I will stand up here with him, and he is my sponsor.
Okay, I just need to be clear. First of all, no speaker can cede their time to another speaker. It's fine if he wants to give you his remarks, but if the person's not a resident or a taxpayer of the district, they're not able to speak at this meeting. But it's perfectly.
Paid by
it doesn't
Lower
matter.
Merion residents.
It doesn't matter. That you could. It doesn't matter.
Speak. Let him speak. We're paying him speak.
This is. He's perfectly fine for him to give your remarks to you to speak or to anybody else.
I am not a lawyer. I'm a physician, and we don't mix well, medicine and law. Thank you. Here he is. Jim, come on.
I just want to be clear. This is a well established regulation of this board. The board can choose to waive it if it wishes.
Wait, excuse, I mean, like, Denise, how many more people do we really have on the list?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So, I mean, if it's all right, well,
vote on that, Ben.
I mean, I understand. I would ask if we can make a motion. I mean, it is just one more, so if we can make a motion to allow this one gentleman to
You can
speak.
make a motion.
So I'd like one motion.
It's okay.
Let me make the motion. I'd like to make a motion to allow this one speaker to speak, just to get through this meeting tonight, please.
I second the motion. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion passes, but we'd ask him to speak at the end then, when he'll be the last person. He needs to add his name to the end.
Okay,
So,
thank you. He was the first speaker we had.
Okay, well, let the rest of the speakers
That's
speak,
fine.
and then he can speak. I think that's fair.
Okay, and I'll
Okay?
I'll write my comments in private to save time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Linda Katz, Michael Jacobs, Joel Hirsch.
Hi, I'm Linda Katz. I am at 212 Landfair Road in Wynwood. I live directly behind this, the school. And I'm on the NACA, North Ardmore Civic Board. I'm a 40-year resident of the site. I've lived through the diesel fumes when we had diesel buses and the backing up of buses at odd hours of the day and night. We lived through the dust of the construction of the high school, but saw a light at the end of the tunnel with 2 high schools of equal size. Although I'm not a football fan, I have a feeling that the goalposts are constantly moving here. Other people have said, but I also feel that it's a broken promise to this community. You promised us 2 high schools of equal size. With the prospect of a parking garage at Lower Merion, you will again break a promise of 24 buses on a surface lot with student parking on campus. Even now, students leave to move cars during the day when we were actually promised a closed campus. We are a neighborhood too, and other people have said that as well. And we've accepted our share of the burden of buses and cars. The site is too congested now without your planned expansion. If neighbors in Bala, Penn Valley, and other areas don't want buses there, then perhaps they could sign an agreement with Lower Merion Township to not have their children transported on buses, and then you wouldn't have the problem. You need to redistrict to live up to the agreement you have with the residents of this site to have 2 high schools of equal size. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Would you like me to answer that question about the Narberth School?
I think that would be helpful,
Okay,
Ken.
thank you. Just getting the terms of the agreement with the Narberth, Borough of Narberth, there was it's a 10-year contract. There was a right of the school district to acquire the property at fair market value for use as a school. However, it specifically states mutually agreeable educational facility does not include the operation of a bus depot or a building to be used solely or primarily for administrative offices.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir, sorry.
Hi, I'm Michael Jacobs. I live right across from the school at 100 Schoolhouse Lane. I just want to mention, it seems like we're rushing very quickly into making some decisions that are going to be very expensive and have very lasting impact on the neighborhood. And it seems like we're doing that without full information. On one hand, there was a property mentioned that seemed to be an option that was fairly less intrusive, the Writers Ferry Road, but there was no dollar amount attached to that. And I don't see how we can be making a decision that involves spending so much money when we don't even know the cost of one of the options, which perhaps could be a lot less than some of the other things that were on the table. The other thing I want to mention is that it seems like a vast amount of potential options have been taken off the table because we're only looking at properties that are in Lower Merion Township. I'm not sure why that decision was made, but tonight we've been told that 2/3 of the student population lives at the eastern end of the township, and that's where all the density is. And it happens that, and also that that area is largely zoned residential, so it's off limits. Well, right along the borders, there are other townships with properties that maybe aren't zoned residential, that might be much more affordable and still be actually a lot closer to the students in other locations in the township. So I don't understand why we're not looking at those types of options. We should take some more time and put together some better choices. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Hirsch?
My name is Joel Hirsch. I live on Aubrey Road near the Wynwood Railroad Station, a few blocks from the high school. And I agree with what most of people have already said. I do want to emphasize the safety and congestion issues that were already brought up. But there have been lots of accidents, as was mentioned earlier. A woman was almost killed, or maybe she was killed. I didn't hear the result. And the congestion is already bad, and we're talking about making it worse. But in addition, I don't know if anyone mentioned this, but there's a lot of development coming in this neighborhood within the next 2 years. The new Whole Foods project, there would likely be 250 apartments with 500 parking spaces on the Merriam estate. There could be some serious development on the St. Charles Seminary site. All of that is going to add congestion to the neighborhood. And as it is now, I can't get out of my street when the buses are coming down, when the trains come in, and it's obviously going to get worse even without any extra buses. So I would like to, and in addition, I would like to ask a question. Why is the December 15th date for making this decision so important? Why can't it be put off? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Guthrie and Allison Graham and Jeff Clatter.
Hi, good evening. Susan Guthrie, Marion Station. I just want to talk a little bit about the enrollment figures that are so often used as the rationale for, I guess, both expanding the choice zone and now having to move the buses off of the Lower Merion site. I'm going to start with a question. At the last meeting, there was a mention of a Montgomery County demographic study to update the existing enrollment study, and I'm just wondering when that will be released, and when it is released, whether the public will have access to the full analysis as opposed to the past demographic study where we just got the results, and in some people's mind there's questions as to the underlying analysis, and then also whether or not the board plans to vote on the parking plan before the Montgomery County study is available. It's interesting to me that the enrollment numbers that have been presented only mention total enrollment and elementary school enrollment. They're incomplete, in my opinion. I understand elementary enrollment is higher than projected, but that's, from my understanding, only K through third grade. Fourth and fifth grade are not above projection, they're actually below. Middle school enrollment is below projection. High school enrollment is below projection. And in fact, if you look at the consultants' projections and you update them with the actual enrollment experience that we've seen in the last 2 years since her study, it turns out that high school enrollment does not exceed 2,800 students, which is the capacity of the two high schools, until 2021. So I'm wondering, to echo what we've heard tonight, what's the rush? If the capacity of the two high schools is 2,800, and one looks at the revised projections, or a set of revised projections based on what we've actually seen, and those numbers don't suggest that high school enrollment will exceed 2,800, it seems to me the prudent course is to reallocate the students across the two high schools rather than spending $20 million to renovate the DAO plus buy land for parking plus add parking structures for buses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Guthrie. As you know, our report is actually, the full report is in fact online, and we in fact did commission a study, unlike the previous board who built the two high schools. So just pointing that out. Go ahead.
Good evening, Allison Graham. Live down on Worcester Road now. My husband and I have lived near the high school since 1970. We are on our third house, moving farther and farther away from the congestion here. I think you have heard everyone in our neighborhood say the LM site is already too congested. Do not put anything more here. I had the pleasure of serving on the building advisory group for this school, and we were planning on having an equal number of students here and at Harriton. I think you have also heard that over and over and over, and I think you should honor that. As far as building more room for buses, two things. Keep the costs down, please. We have neighbors who cannot live here anymore because the school taxes are so high. Number two, use land that we already own. And as far as what I saw up on the screen tonight, the best site would be Welsh Valley, and I'll tell you why. It would take no construction. It could be paved, and as far as flexibility is concerned, it could be repurposed later because a level parking lot, and I would recommend as an environmentalist that it be paved with pervious paving and made an exhibition of what you can do with green building. That is something that the education, the school district should be interested in. It is accessible, and it, as I say, I could relay it out to get more buses in there, frankly, but that is the best site, far and away, is Welsh Valley. One last thing. We might look at redoing the bus routes so that we don't need so many new buses. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jeff Klager. I live in Owen Road, just really around the corner. I consider myself to be a fairly urban person. I grew up and lived in some of the most congested areas in the city. Grew up in South Philadelphia. I lived in Center City for many years. I have spent my entire life fighting and living with traffic and noise. Yet when I moved here in 1988, the very first morning, I said, what the hell is going on? I looked out my window, long line of buses, diesel noise, crowds. Why did I move to the suburbs? Then when it came time to build the schools, we had exactly the same scenario. Thanksgiving, Christmas, we have to make a decision. If we don't make a decision, the sky will fall. Earlier this year, I was at a zoning hearing for the city of Philadelphia. CHOP made this beautiful presentation why they had to build the first of two towers in this congested small spot along the river where that new trail was. And the city had to make a decision within 3 months because they had made all these preparations. If they didn't, the sky would fall. Take a deep breath, think about it, postpone this decision, give everybody a chance to find an alternative that everybody can live with. What you're doing now will not work, will not be accepted, will lead to more people not suburban flight, but urban flight, you will depopulate the neighborhood. Just think about it. This is no way to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rizzo?
I want to thank the members of the board very much for your graciousness in allowing me to speak. My name is Jim Greenfield. I'm an attorney representing the Wynwood Civic Association here tonight. I'm also a native of Lower Merion and a graduate of Lower Merion High School. I was very much involved in the process, including a number of appearances before this board during the time in 2006 and 2007 when the plans for both this high school and Harriton were discussed. And what you wound up with was a plan for this particular site in which you had a fully developed site. The plan uses up about as much of the site as it was possible to use. The approval by the township, I believe, had attached to it approximately 100 conditions. And I know you've already heard from a lot of people about the congestion that has resulted from what you have here, so I won't revisit that, but I think what that tells you is something significant about the extraordinary level of concern that people have about the safety of this immediate community. We haven't seen a plan for a possible parking garage on this site yet, but I can tell you that I doubt that it's possible for you to develop a garage on this site in a manner that's consistent with township zoning regulations. And I can't imagine a scenario where you would not be required to go to the zoning hearing board for some type of approval. The Wynwood Civic Association is committed, for all the reasons you've heard tonight, to opposing the location of a parking garage on this site. And accordingly, we'll do everything that it possibly can, legally and otherwise, to oppose the construction of such a garage. We hope that you'll reconsider and find another more appropriate location for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it.
Okay. Thank you very much for your comments. I do want to comment on some of the statements or concerns that were raised. We will, on December 8th, try to address as much of that as possible, though we cannot address all the statements and comments tonight. I want to say this, and I wasn't going to, but I will say it. I don't know the level of deception that members here feel about previous administration. I wasn't going to comment on that until current administration was put in the same sentence. And in the 5 months that I've been sitting in this chair, and I want to look at everyone in their eyes so you hear what I'm saying to you. And maybe you felt that there were things that the way in which I'm talking to you and asking you to look at me was probably the same way a previous administration did the same thing and said some things. There is absolutely, unequivocally, no attempt on my part to deceive any members of this community. I will concede to the idea that there might be a lack of clarity in my presentation, but that does not equate to deception. My primary ethos has always been about transparency. in trying to do that. So in that attempt to do that, and if I have failed to do that, then that's an error on my part, but not because it is a deliberate attempt not to share information with this community. I also want to say that I have heard your comments, and there are themes that resonate through. Though I've heard a lot of comments, and we're jotting all of them down, we'll make sure that we'll address them. But there were some themes that came across that. Some themes that require additional consideration and serious thought. Hence the reason why we are here tonight. So this idea around, which makes me want to think, what is it that we could have done that led individuals to believe that we're being deceptive? Though I don't believe that is the case at all. But I will examine that, because that's what I do. Second, I want to examine the idea about transparency. What was it about my leadership and my presentations that would lead others to do that? And I'm willing to look into that and reflect on that. That's what good practitioners do, and that's what I will model. I also heard that time, the idea about rushing, majority of you referenced that. Why are we moving so quickly? Why do we need to make a decision at this particular moment? Why is December 15th that earmark? We need more time to have conversation. And then there were the issues around safety, safety, safety. And though it may not appear that way based on the options that we wanted to say, these are the things we're thinking about. No decisions have been made. We conceded that congestion was a factor in several, if not one of the primary options we have here. And we do and continue to think about the safety of Montgomery Avenue. And that is a collective conversation between the school district and the township. Because the reality is that there needs to be a much larger conversation about the traffic signals, the speeding, the rate in which people are traveling through Montgomery, and that is a conversation to be had. And then this conversation around equal high schools, equal numbers, promises broken, commitments that were made in different times under certain different conditions. When I look at where Harrington High School was in 2008, with 700 and some odd students, and some tremendous inequity in terms of programming and instruction, the level of courses that were provided. There's a valid argument in terms of whether or not opportunity and access was available to all when we look at that. But fast forward, and it might not be the progress that individuals are looking for, might not happen as fast as you like or the way it did. We fast forward to current time, and we're seeing that when you take a look at our curriculum offerings, taking a look at opportunities for students around the curricular area, that we're very proud in terms of that progress, in terms of the number of courses that are being offered at Harrington versus the courses offered at Lower Merion. We have an extended IB program with dual enrollment program at the schools, and we're proud to offer comparable classes in terms of AP and honors courses. And then there was this conversation about high school choice, and that between June and November of 2013, the district did present information to the community to reverse high school choice. And we talked about it, and there was major conversations. And there were many options that were considered. And part of that was, do we, A, build additions to Harrington to accommodate enrollment growth? Or do we use existing DAO buildings and retrofit that to accommodate the growth? And we talked about cost and what were the cost implications to either of those options. And we chose to reclassify and reoccupy the space at the DAO, existing classrooms, retrofit that, goes to the least expensive option to move forward with. With regards to the numbers in terms of equal size high schools, yes, you are absolutely correct that they are not equal size. They do not have the same numbers speaking today, but they're not 400 students more than the other. But there's conversation to be had with that. So without, and I thank you, and I tried to take copious notes with some of the comments, and I know my colleagues and the administrative team to my right, to your left, have been taking notes, and we will attempt to address many of your questions at our next board meeting, and if we're able to do that, we'll post that information on our website. But I do want to clarify and say one more time that this administration is not attempting to deceive anyone about anything. And I hope that this continued dialogue will make us think more broadly about the decisions in which we move forward with. We're not making a decision tonight. I understand that there are individuals who want to extend that collaborative process further down the road because it is a heavy, big decision to move forward with. So I say thank you in the same spirit in which I welcomed you, knowing that you're extremely committed and passionate about your community. I'm extremely impressed and humbled for those who have lived the Lower Merion experience and have been here for 40 years and 40 plus years, and you can speak to that, and it's not going on deaf ears when we hear that. So we will make our attempts to address as many of your questions as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Marseille, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. We appreciate everybody's concerns. We know that people are frustrated with the fact that we've had to make decisions based on increasing enrollment that in 2012, Dr. McGinley recommended that we hire an outside consultant to try and understand what was going on because the numbers were so much higher than we had expected. And we hired that consultant, and we've been dealing with the impacts of that in terms of, budget and staffing and transportation and class sizes. And I think as a board, we can say that we remain committed to ensuring that our class sizes remain the way they are, that we want to continue to have small class sizes, and that that is really a driving force behind everything we do, because we're very concerned about those issues, and we think that's particularly true, as we're watching more and more kids coming through our elementary schools. So we appreciate everybody coming out, and we wish you a happy Thanksgiving and a safe Thanksgiving, and we are adjourned. Thank you.